So what we've learnt in philanthropy, and particularly in the ASB Trust in Auckland, is that there are some fundamental problems facing New Zealand society. And one of the issues that we decided we wish to address is the issue of Māori and Pasifika educational underachievement in New Zealand. And when we started to do some research into this issue, we discovered some figures that I know to many of you may now be very familiar, but they were deeply shocking to our trust. And the first piece of research we obtained was from the OECD, which tells us that New Zealand has the second lowest rate of educational equality in the OECD. So if you think of the list of OECD countries, Greece has a higher rate of educational equality than New Zealand does. We're second only to Belgium. And I know that when we put this OECD data to our trustees, one of them said it must be wrong. You know, the OECD must be wrong. So what we then looked at is what's happening to Māori and Pasifika children in New Zealand schools. And what we discovered is that educational underachievement in New Zealand is concentrated in low decile schools, and that Māori and Pacific students are concentrated in low decile schools. And if you look at the figures for children leaving school without any qualifications whatsoever, you find that under 4% of Asian New Zealanders leave school with no qualifications, that 12% of Pākehā children leave school without any, that 15% of Pacific children leave our schools without any qualifications, and that over 20% of Māori children leave our schools without any qualifications. And when you then look at individual communities, so for example in Whangarei, 56% of boys leave school, of Māori boys, leave school in Whangarei with no qualifications whatsoever. So if then you start thinking about welfare to work or benefit reform, you have to ask yourself, what is happening to this group of young people in our community? And if you think about the discussion that we had with Bob just a few minutes ago, where he was talking about the conditions that are happening outside of the figures that we're all looking at, these young people aren't even fit for work at the moment, in this century. The skills that you now need to go into a basic factory require you to be literate, require you even to work on a factory line to be able to use a computer, to be able to read what's on the computer screen. So we're producing a whole cohort of severely underprivileged children. And if you think of the comment that Bob made where he said you've got to look at the inflows, it seems to me there are some fundamental issues we have to address about what's happening in particular to Māori and Pasifika children, and in particular boys in our community, in the greater context of thinking about welfare and benefit reform. I think there are some really exciting things happening in our communities that are being supported by philanthropy, and I just want to talk about a couple. And one is a program in Porirua that some of you may be aware of that's funded by the Todd Foundation, which is the Streets Ahead 237, which is started by a former gang member who actually got a social work degree, started a program and is now working at an absolutely grassroots level with young people, building up role models, building up their skills and actually getting them ready for employment. And there are programs like this happening in communities, and I'm sure everybody in this room is aware of those programs. And I think the challenge to the task force is to actually think about welfare reform in the context of the greater social issues and social deprivation. And just to finish, I wanted to talk about a little project that we're funding. Well, it's not too little, but it's in Tahana, which you may know is a little community just north of Whangarei, just north of Auckland. And this is a community that until about 10 years ago had full employment. So everybody in Tahana and the surrounding neighbourhoods had full employment. And in the last decade, it's become an extremely deprived and depressed and dysfunctional community. And so we've been funding the Tahana Community Development Trust, which was established in 2002 by local iwi and community members as a direct community response to serious economic and social issues that this community faces. And so what they're looking at is projects that will address not only the educational issue that I've outlined, but alongside it the employment issues. So actually looking at how do you generate employment opportunities in communities like this. Because if you refer back to what Bob's been talking about, we've got to think of welfare reform or benefit reform in the context of the communities and the economies in which people live. And I think there are some really exciting things happening in communities like that. And Phil O'Reilly, the Chief Executive of Business New Zealand, was quoted in the Dominion Post on the 8th of May, which is only last weekend, as saying, if Māori and Pacifica don't succeed in the next 20 years, New Zealand will fail as a nation. So I guess my contribution to this discussion is that we've got to address that fundamental issue as a piece of this puzzle. It's not the whole issue, but it's an important piece, and it's one where philanthropy is really happy to engage with community partners and see if we can actually work together in partnership and address some of these issues. So kia ora. You're all very quiet, but it's good to be here.